Hey everyone, this is a video on the topic of cartomancy and divination, which is one of the modalities that I use in my work when I am supporting clients on their spiritual care needs. Um, there are a number of ways to go about talking about this, but I want to start first with talking about what I mean by divination, and then explain cartomancy, and within that, the kind of cartomancy that I do. So divination, which is a larger category that cartomancy falls within, is conventionally understood to be a practice of future seeing or fortune telling, in the future seeing sense. I don't mean the term in that way, though I don't disagree that that is a possible outcome of, divinatory processes. It's just not what I view as the pursuit of divination. And this is actually in line with the original meaning of the word divination, which comes from the Latin word divinare, which means to receive inspiration or insight from the divine. That has then been understood primarily to mean insights about the future, but that is not actually the entirety of what divination as a term originally meant. It simply meant to engage in a process by which we receive insight that we could not be able to uh, come up with through our own consciousness alone. And so has that on occasion led to glimpses into the possible future? Sure, of course. No doubt that has been the case for me, actually, and many people across time and place and eras. This is well documented and not like, conspiratorially woo, to be able to have glimpses into the future. It's just not something that I find particularly helpful to view as the primary goal for divinatory processes, because, as is understood by a number of traditions, the future is in process, even if there might be certain things that are inevitable. At the very least, our relational approach and the way we go about meeting that future can shift dramatically, sometimes to the point of having impacts on the future. So, just from a practical standpoint, trying to discern the future is, I don't think, necessarily a great use of time. I also don't think it's often a very ethical one. And it can also very easily leave oneself or the client that we're working with, if we're a spiritual care provider, potentially feeling trapped in, oh, this thing is going to happen no matter what I do or don't do. So there can be a sort of helplessness that can develop when looking into the future. And also, obviously, there's just a lot of grifting and snake oil type, divinatory practitioners who are making stuff up. And those futures that they claim will happen never happen. So, for a bunch of reasons, I do not view divination, and certainly, or I don't practice divination as a future telling enterprise. But instead, I view it as an opportunity to help someone deepen their relationship to the present moment and whatever is or isn't there in that moment, so that a path towards a healthier way of approaching reality writ large can be discerned. And from that comes an increased capacity to meet whatever future is to come. One that might be obviously on the way or not at all obviously on the way. Um, and one of my preferred modalities for divination, because there are many, 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 basically anything that's a material object can become a source of divinatory insight. That's just not me who thinks that. That is thought about writ large, and also pretty obvious, given that divinatory processes take thousands of forms, from reading tea leaves to reading bones to reading cards to reading bird flight patterns and cloud formations. I mean, again, anything that is material, it's almost like in some culture that has become a vehicle for a divinatory process. My love of cartomancy is that it uses imagery on cards. So that's what cartomancy means. It's the use of cards for the process of divination, which again is not to perceive the future necessarily. It's to develop a deeper relationship with the present moment. And the reason why I love cartomancy and imagery-based divinatory processes is that it taps into a very, very ancient, and by ancient, I mean like evolutionarily ancient, a sort of language bank that we have as humans, given that before there was written language and even verbalized communication of the sort that I am using right now, there was a relationship to the visible world. There was imagery, and the original the oldest languages, they did not use letters like we do now, that are basically abstracted icons that can help us to lead us to recognize, a particular object. But rather, ancient languages, their original letters, you could say, were images of easily recognizable objects, such as birds or tools or persons. There wasn't nearly as much in the way of abstracted remove from the object in, ancient languages. So when we're using cartomancy as an image-based form of divination, we're tapping into a much evolutionarily ancient language system, essentially, which is therefore able to yield a lot deeper insights that, you could argue are quote unquote pre-verbal, prehistoric, if we're thinking of history as the records that come after, language became a recorded process where we had books and records and all of that. So cartomancy, I've seen it many, many times over now. When I'm working with a client with whom I'm primarily engaging in a conversation like this, in our sessions, if on a given day we end up using tarot cards or an oracle deck, because I also use oracle decks in addition to tarot, tarot being a form of card deck that's pretty famous throughout the world that has a particular structure to it. The moment that a client and I start to use tarot or an oracle deck as a vehicle for helping to discern information and inspiration from the divine on a particular topic, an enormous amount of wellspring of information is suddenly opened, because it is tapping into a different type of information than one can access through conventional language, whether written or verbalized alone. And so it's I've seen it over and over again that it is a very highly effective modality for helping people to come to clarity about something that they keep coming up against roadblocks with, when it comes to, just sort of conventional conversations. That said, it is a modality that, the space has to be held well, either by the person who's practicing it on their own or the practitioner who's holding space for someone. And that, of course, includes, setting the intention properly for the purpose of that divinatory session, which again is why I don't like to do future telling sessions, because I just have never experienced that as a very fruitful endeavor. It runs too high a risk of leaving someone imprisoned in a future that they cannot alter, whether or not that's actually true. And it also doesn't really get at the present moment and what's real for the person here and now, that they can actually have a concrete, relationship with and impact on. So it's much more effective in my own experience, to view a cartomancy session or any divinatory session as an exploration of the present moment and how the person is in relationship with that moment. Because that will then help to clarify, how does a person want to move towards whatever future is coming, down the line. And also whatever past they have already experienced. Because, right, if past is prologue, then how we are in relationship with our past heavily influences the way that we relate to the future. And both of those things meet in the present. So when setting, the tone for a divinatory session, I always emphasize that we're exploring the here and now, while being, of course, informed by the past, because the past, is what helped to lead to the present moment. And examining the relational dynamics between the person that is asking, cards for information, and their present circumstances, their past circumstances, and that therefore helps to illuminate, well, is the relationship that are all of those relational dynamics ones that we want to continue, right? If yes, great. If not, let's explore how shifts might be possible, which shifts are even desirable, and then watch as the future ends up shifting, / our relationship to the future ends up shifting, such that whatever is to come, we meet it with greater grace and dignity. And I keep using this word a lot, relationship. That's at the core to me of divinatory process. A divinatory process is a relational process between the person who's asking the question, the tool that they're using, the question that they're asking, and the reality in which all of that is happening. Whether that reality, is considered by the person to be one that's imbued with theistic notions of God, or perhaps a more, sort of secular psychological approach. The point is that this is a relational dynamic between the person and all of those things. And it is my job, and any other sort of card reader's job, to help that person develop a healthier, holier, more holistic, however you want to frame it, relationship with all of those things, so that they can meet their own life better and more, more confidently, or more humbly, or more, whatever is needed for them, in order to access a fuller range of their own self, and a fuller range of reality. So, in my own sessions, it's a deeply relational process, including the fact that I am helping to facilitate a relationship between the client and the cards that are in front of them. So that includes asking for their input when I'm shuffling cards, when I'm laying out the cards, and when I am, explaining my own intuitive and also like historic learned interpretation of the spread. I'm actually doing less talking than the person in front of me, because the point for me is not to word vomit information on the person that can then leave them overwhelmed about, like, whoa, like that's just like a lot of information about, whatever it is that I'm asking through all these cards. But rather, what I am actually aiming to do is to help the person deepen into their own, into I'm trying to help the person improve their own relationship to their intuitive capacities by, of course, igniting possible insights through my own comments, but more importantly, helping them to share out loud, being witnessed, by a compassionate and caring and qualified presence, whatever insights are coming to them, so that then it is clear to them that whatever insight they take away from a session, it is theirs. Like all the way through, it is theirs. It's not me offering a prescription that is divorced from the person in front of me based on just like, generic understandings of what the cards are saying. it's actually incredibly personal to that person because I'm actually just helping them come to clarity about the wisdom that they already have inside of them, which isn't to say that I'm not playing an important role. I am holding space for someone to see themselves reflected in both the beautiful and the harder like aspects of themselves, so that they can then really feel capable of meeting their life themselves and their process in that moment as those things are, with greater capacity and confidence, which then lets them leave the session feeling empowered, feeling not like they are, at the whim of reality or whatever future is to come, or, that they, desperately need me holding their hand all the time, after the session, but rather they are reflected back to them what they already have at their disposal, and also are given greater tools to be able to gather further resources after the session if need be, and know for themselves that they have intuitive capacities that can serve them well in meeting their moment and their future and also their past better than they could before. So, the sort of long story short for me of divination is that it is a relational practice above anything else. And it is the job of the person who is in my position of holding space for a client to feel themselves to be in deeper, better relationship with themselves, their process and reality, than they did before the session. So again, like this is slightly different from conventional understandings of divination and cartomancy, which typically view those things as future telling and also as a space in which the professional is just kind of info dumping on the person, which both of those things alone can leave someone feeling overwhelmed or trapped, and not really confident in their own capacities for information gathering from reality or meeting reality. Um, and let alone when you bring, future telling and info dumping together in a divination session, you can really quickly leave a client feeling overwhelmed or spooked, or just like maybe not in agreement with what was shared with them, or just dissatisfied with the process. Instead, I have found enormous success in actually creating a container where it's not future focused, but present moment focused, and also focused on helping the person be aided in their own process of coming to the information that would be useful for them in that moment of their lives. So that again, they leave feeling confident in themselves, their process, and the reality surrounding them, which, is it's good for the client and it's good for the practitioner, because my job is not to control that person's process, but rather to aid them in navigating it through compassionate support, which is just a lot less intense, I would say, for the practitioner, in addition to being more pleasurable for the client. So would be happy to answer any questions that anyone has after seeing this video, if there are any questions or confusions, or even comments about, the topic. But, again, this is an incredibly potent modality. If there's a question that you or someone is having in one's life, that conventional sort of conversation or journaling and sort of normal linguistics is just not able to really get to. And there are tons and tons and tons of books and decks out there. People can go to any Barnes and Noble or practically almost any bookstore and find lots of different options if they want to start a personal practice of divination, of the cartomancy type. And of course, if there's ever a desire to work with a professional, there are many, many, many card readers out there on the internet, and or in one's locale. I would just personally recommend working with someone who takes a a present moment approach to that work, and who is invested in helping their clients to deepen into their own intuitive capacities, through the process of divination with a professional, as opposed to, a more info dumping kind of session. So, um, best of luck if you're someone who will, begin your own divination process. I trust that that will be a really special experience for you. And of course, I'm someone who offers those services if ever needed. And there are many, many other people who do as well, who could be great fits for you if that is of interest. So hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for more videos on other spiritual care modalities that I work with. Thanks.